2005, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune liver disease called primary biliary cirrhosis. It is relatively rare. About 10,000 cases a year, I guess, are diagnosed. At the time, I was married for 6 years. I had a 5-year-old little boy. I was working full-time. I was working part-time at my sister's dance studio. I was playing music at 2 churches on the weekends and playing in a band, and I never stopped. And this diagnosis stopped me in my tracks. I was paralyzed for a little bit. The surgeon that diagnosed it referred me to a liver specialist, but that was taking time to see them. So I, like many of us, took to the internet to learn about my diagnosis. And what I discovered was that the big thing was that after diagnosis, most people have about 7 years before they would require a liver transplant. There is no cure. There are few treatments. The treatments really are just for symptom relief when your liver disease progresses. At that time, I was completely asymptomatic. I just had some funny numbers in my blood work with my liver enzymes. So when I finally did see the specialist, she basically said to me, go live your life. Go enjoy your life. We'll deal with everything as it comes. Life is no guarantee, so enjoy your life, which I did. I stopped my nonsense and I carried on, and I continued doing what I was doing until the disease started to progress. So within about 3 years, my symptoms started and I got itchy. That was the first thing. It started out as an annoyance, and it basically became so fierce and relentless that I couldn't sleep. Fatigue became a big issue towards the end of the symptoms. I became confused, my belly got big, but finally what led to my need for transplant was a trip to the intensive care unit, because once your liver doesn't work well, really everything else stops working well too. So after my trip to the intensive care, I was referred to the Toronto General Hospital transplant team. So once I began heading to Toronto to the transplant team, they do a full assessment from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. They need to know that you're well enough to receive a transplant. Sick enough to need it, but well enough to receive it. Interestingly, something that I found out was that in the case of a liver transplant, I can have a live donor. So there's no bank of live donors, and what Toronto does is they give you the parameters that you would need to find someone who could be a match for you, and they send you out to canvass your friends and your family and anyone you know who might like to become your donor. I was very opposed to that. I could not imagine asking someone to go through that, to have major surgery, to give up an organ, a vital organ, to save my life. I just couldn't do that. My sister and a friend took that on and began looking for a donor for me. But I was listed, and the list was about, at that time, 2 to 3 years. to get a liver transplant. So about 2 months after I started attending my appointments in Toronto, my doctor walked in the room and said, well, I think, we're going to stop at this point. And my heart sunk. And I thought, oh gosh, what happened? What did they find? And he said, we have your donor. Your transplant is booked for next week. And we'll see you next Tuesday. And I was in complete shock. I had no idea what was happening. I got home and discovered that a friend of mine, Christine Kyle, had gone ahead. She had applied to Toronto. She was tested from the top of her head to the tip of her toes to know that she was well enough to be a donor. She was a mother. She had 2 teenage children. She has a big family, extended family, and she wanted to do this to save my life. And I was completely overwhelmed with gratitude. But a week later, regardless, I received my first liver transplant on January 30th, 2013. Just as an aside, my donor spent 5 days in the hospital. She then returned to Kingston, and she returned to work 8 weeks later. And in 3 months at her return appointment, her liver had returned to its full size. It regenerated and was at its full size. At the 6-month mark, it was at full function again. For me, I stayed in Toronto I stayed in the hospital for about 8 weeks, and then I took up residence in Toronto for another 6 weeks while I continued my follow-up and to recover. So that first year I was pretty overwhelmed. Everything was new. The medications were new. I was overwhelmed with gratitude to Chris. And it was a bit of a scary time. However, things started to return to normal, and unfortunately after that first year, I started to get ill again, and at about the 3-year mark, we discovered that the autoimmune disease that had destroyed my first liver was now back and working on its second victim. So I was listed again for a second liver transplant, and this time I couldn't have a live donor. My option was a deceased donor, so I was placed on the deceased donor list. And 1 year to the day later, I received a second liver transplant on August the 8th, 2017. Well, after any major life event, as we all do, you start to reassess things that are important. And what I honestly discovered most was that my family and my friends are the most important thing in my life, and they walked this journey with me, and they have continued to support me through this. I don't take anything for granted anymore. I certainly don't take my health for granted. But since receiving my transplants, I have been able to attend my son's high school graduation. And since becoming ill 15 years ago, we haven't been able to travel. So we've taken 2 family vacations since then. I've returned to volunteering. I play the organ back at the churches, and a little bit in the band for fun. But most importantly, what I've been able to do was join an organization called the Transplant Advocate Association. In 2013, shortly after my transplant, my mother received a call from a young lady who I used to babysit. Her name is Shalane Labette, and she had received a double lung transplant some years prior to my surgery. And she invited my mother and I to attend a coffee and chat with this group. And what happened the day that I attended that was that I was embraced by this group of people. They understood what happened to me, what I had gone through, what medications I was taking. They listened, and I don't know that I would have gotten through all that I did without them. Now, as a member of that group, I'm able to give back. So I cannot give back the gifts that I've received, but I can pay them forward. So now I'm able to help people. Sometimes we're providing reassurance, sometimes we're listening. But most of all, everything that we do now, we do through a filter of that transplant experience, so that we're able to understand what people are going through. And just sometimes having that listening ear and that understanding is all you need to be able to continue your journey. Well, I would just like people to know that one donor can save 8 lives, but they can change the lives of 75 other people, one donor. As of yesterday, when I checked the stats, 1,625 people are currently listed for transplant in Ontario alone. 35% of the people in Ontario have registered to be organ donors. What I do know is that most people aren't opposed to organ donation, they just haven't registered. In Kingston, we're doing a little better. We have a 50% registration rate. What I would like you to know, and what I would like you to do, is if you have reservations, talk to your doctor, ask questions. And if you haven't registered, you need to take 2 minutes, pick up your health card, go to www.beadonor.ca, and you can register your consent to be a donor. I would not be here if someone had not registered. There's nothing that I wouldn't do to try to help someone else. Please give the gift of life.